content. Isn't that odd?
You know what,
maybe I need to go to the home page.
My daughter is texting me from the other room saying it's live now of her. Let me just ask her to come in here and help.
Yeah, perfect. Do that. Always get the younger generation to help. They always. Oh, God.
Yeah, we're getting comments saying it's live for everyone else. Annie.
Okay, hi guys. Thank you for joining. Okay. Hi.
Daughter.
Hello.
Nice to meet you. Thank you so much for helping.
Okay.
It's there. It says live. Now am I there?
There you go.
Okay, so now request. Have you requested?
Send request.
Okay. Now I have to find you. Greenpeace! Woohoo! I think it's working. Okay.
Yay!
It's not working yet. It's not working yet. Wait. It's waiting for you. Connecting.
Yay!
I'm so happy.
Human triumph over technology.
Let me turn down that.
Okay, so now guys, sorry, last technical thing. Just the volume on your phone should be turned all the way down.
Yeah. It's done.
And perhaps you want to have your headphones in, going directly into the computer.
Oh, is mine not working?
I don't know. I wouldn't know.
Why is it not working? How do I work that? Oh my God, this is so funny.
Maybe that's fine. Thank you, everyone on Zoom, for your patience.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Why is it? Let me just try and turn my Bluetooth off again. Yep, should be working. 1 second. Sorry.
I think that'll be fine, Sarah.
Please work. Thank you. Annie, while we're doing this, just what an honor it is to meet you. I am a big fan of your work, and just thank you for joining us on this and helping to educate myself and to educate everyone else. I think we have a friend in common. Shailene Woodley says hello. So,
Oh, yes.
yeah. But yeah. So
can I interrupt?
Yeah, please.
So, Annie, can you turn the phone volume all the way down on the side button?
It says it's down.
It says it's down.
Cara, love, is your phone volume all the way down?
Yep. It's not coming out my phone.
Okay. Annie, it would be wonderful to hear a little bit about the work that you've been doing and just a short intro.
Just trying to figure out why the volume is not going down. Is there still an echo?
No, there's not now. So great, you have your sound technician
My
there.
headphone is not working.
Okay.
My
Okay.
is not coming through my headphone. Is it coming through your headphone?
It's coming through my headphones now.
It's coming through my headphones now.
I think it must be me then, guys.
The headphones are connected to the computer.
Okay, well, my
Headphones up.
Can you ask your daughter to help me? I think it should be fine. We'll figure it out.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I did it. I'm so sorry. Thank you guys for your patience.
I assure you all that we are better at combating plastic than we are at managing technological advices, so do not lose confidence in us.
Well said, Annie. Thank you.
I would love to, and also want to thank you so much for sharing the story of plastics with folks. I want everybody to see that. I used to feel alone that I was so obsessed with plastic and garbage, and I love that so many people are interested in that now. I actually grew up in the Pacific Northwest in Seattle, in an area that's really beautiful, lots of forests, oceans. And I grew up just loving nature and not thinking so much about plastic and garbage. And it was when I started traveling and going to bigger cities that I started paying a lot of attention to the garbage around and how it was moving around. And when I started looking at the garbage, I realized that that the forests that I loved were being chopped down to be turned into garbage. The beautiful natural areas that I loved were being destroyed by fossil fuel operations to make plastic to turn into the garbage. I realized that if you care about nature, you have to care about garbage. And when I started looking more into garbage and waste and plastic, I realized it's not just an environmental issue. It's a justice issue. It's a health issue. It's a social issue. It's an economic issue. Waste and garbage and pollution and plastic, all of that is a great doorway and to enter to see so many things wrong with our economy. So I've spent literally the last 30 years studying waste, and I have traveled to 40 countries to visit the factories where our stuff is made and the dumps where our stuff is dumped. It's a fascinating way to spend your life.
Oh, I mean, it's a lot braver than a lot of us. So thank you for the work you do. It makes such a difference.
Well, thanks for helping to raise awareness for it. I mean, wasn't that an incredible film, The Story of Plastics? That allowed everybody to take the journey that I took over the last couple of decades.
If I could talk a little bit about that, I haven't cried that much I've cried a little bit recently, but that film really got me in a lot of places, and I had to rewind and rewatch it, because at the end of the day, you know, especially now in this time, it's a lot easier to live in the darkness and not educate yourself and to be ignorant in a way. But actually it's not, because you don't, you know, we are as human sensitive creatures who are empathetic, and once you see the plight of what people have to deal with, or, you know, especially the people that, you know, we've all seen the landfills and the dumps and stuff, but you don't actually see or speak to the people that live by them, that have their life expectancies cut, that have to then move away, or just you know, with the girl that says she, you know, had the lungs of someone who's a smoker, or lived, you know, in a mine, or like was a miner, that like just killed me. And one thing I was thinking about is, you know, if we were all to imagine the amount of plastic that we had probably gone through in one of our lifetimes, right? See it in front of you, and then look at that. Even that's just imagining it. It's probably more than what we even think. And imagine that's just gone somewhere. That's just gone into a fish's mouth, or killed an animal, or is sitting in someone's backyard. And that, to me, was such a powerful image. I now just don't even want to look at plastic, but unfortunately we're also looking at it right now. But this is different.
Well, I think from a young age, we're indoctrinated not to think about a way. You know, we're told throw something away without thinking about where is a way, you know, beyond our recycling bin or our rubbish bin, where does it go? And we've been trained to think that recycling means putting our plastic container in the right bin, but that's not the end. Where does it go? And so that's one of the things I love about this film, is it takes us to see where it goes, so that out of sight doesn't have to mean out of mind. Out of mind,
100%. Also, I mean, if anyone hasn't, I haven't read the book yet, but if anyone hasn't seen the story of stuff, watch the YouTube. It's short and it's easy, it's bite-sized. And also, the one thing I really admire about you so much is the way that you talk about things. Even if it's devastating, you still have such a positive attitude. The way you speak about stuff, it's impossible not to listen to you. Like, you have such a positive, infectious nature, even though you've kind of been dealing with the truth that we all don't want to admit for so long. And I'd love to hear, like, how the making of this film kind of came about, and what did you feel there was, like, was there a lacking in the narratives around plastic that you wanted people to know about, or what inspired you?
There's lots of lacking in the narrative about plastic, and that's not a coincidence. You know, the plastic industry has been really good at limiting the discussion of plastic and focusing the public attention on our behavior. You know, the term litter bug was actually invented by plastics and petrochemical companies, because they were trying to divert the attention away from the companies that are making this pollution and saturating our lives with plastic, to make it feel like it's our fault, this sort of individual responsibility. And of course, we should be responsible, but it's impossible to be responsible and always make the right choices when those choices aren't available to us, because the plastics, you know, has just permeated our lives. So the kinds of things that were missing from the public understanding of plastic, one is the connection to fossil fuels. A lot of people don't realize that plastics are primarily fossil fuels, and it's hard to understand. It's like a cognitive dissonance. If you're holding a plastic bottle, it doesn't feel like it's oil and gas, but it is. And so connecting it to fossil fuels is really important, which makes us understand how we're not going to stop fossil fuels without stopping single-use plastic, and we're not going to stop single-use plastic without stopping fossil fuels. So the fossil fuels part is important. Another part that's really important is about the corporate intentionality about this. It didn't just happen that plastic became everywhere. It wasn't because consumers demanded it. It wasn't because we said, we want the convenience, we never want to wash another dish. It was an absolute plan by the petrochemical industries to expand their markets so that they could drill more oil and gas, turn it into products, and then convince us we need them. And we simply don't need it. So I love that that story of plastic shows the whole life cycle, from the oil and gas production to the facilities where the oil and gas is turned into plastic, where so many people are suffering such serious health impacts. And then all the way through the disposal, which most people know about the disposal. But you got to think about where the plastic came from, too.
Yeah. As the movie, one second, sorry. Sorry, just to interrupt with the technical thing. It's on my phone, but I can't turn it down completely. So I don't, because it goes down, but it's not, sorry guys, it doesn't go all the way down. There's like a tiny little bar, which just doesn't go away if anyone can.
So that was the same thing that was the same thing to me. And my daughter went into the,
what did she do?
She did something else. Because you can't turn it down all the way with the button. It only goes part way down.
See, we all need a daughter like yours somewhere. Okay, help me. Okay, I'm just going to hold it away from the computer, and I think that will help. I think that works. Kind of. Oh, okay, fine. Okay.
Teamwork makes the dream work. Excellent.
Yes, exactly. So what the other thing I was going to ask is, as what I think is very important is because obviously I think the companies and the government likes to make people think that it's the consumer's fault, right? And that we're not doing enough, we need to recycle more, even though recycling isn't enough anyway. But what do you think? Obviously it's important, but it's just not gonna, again, I love the whole concept about turning the tap off. Like, please, can we turn the tap off? But what is the best way to move forward and push the people in charge to actually change the policies?
Well, I'm so glad you said that about pushing the people in charge to change the policies, because so often people think, what can I do to reduce plastic, and exhaust themselves. There's all these people, I live in California, and there's all these families that try to produce, only this much plastic per year, and it takes so much effort. And that's a interesting exercise to do, but that time is better spent trying to change the policies. That's where the biggest lever is. And policies to reduce plastic can happen at the local level, at the city level. They can happen at the state level. They can happen at the federal level. I'll tell you, where I live in California is probably the most environmentally aware town in the country. And we did decades of campaigns to bring your own reusable shopping bag. But it wasn't the law. You could still get a plastic bag. So I usually brought my own shopping bag, but I admit sometimes I was at the door and I had left it in the car. Sometimes I didn't. So we got a ban on single-use plastic bags. There still are paper bags for people who need a bag. And overnight, just once this ban went into effect, overnight plastic bags just disappeared. We could never have gotten to that level of plastic reduction just by nagging people. And also, nagging is not really fun for the nagger or the naggy. We got to think about how to change practices without becoming whiny nags, because that doesn't recruit people to our movement. And so now what's happened is that the norms have changed around shopping. Nobody asks for a plastic bag. And in fact, if you did forget your bag, you can buy a paper bag for 5 cents, but that would be so embarrassing to get a bag now. I see people like pulling their sweatshirts out with all their cans of soup in it and carrying it out to the car, because we have totally changed the cultural norms. So I think bans on the most hazardous products, single-use plastic, PVC plastic, those are great. Bans at the city level, at the state level, and at the federal level. I mean, I saw in the chat that there are people from all different countries joining in. So welcome, great to see you. And different places would have different entree points that make the most sense. It often helps to start small. If you're not even ready to get your city to ban bottled water or single-use plastic, start with your school, start with your work, start with your gym. Like, does your gym have bottled water? That's nuts. You got to get rid of that. Get a refillable water. Start locally, as small and locally as possible, to build your muscles. And then once you get your gym, once you get your school, once you get your church, once you get your workplace, then scale up and up and up until it just takes over the whole planet.
I just love how you talk about all of this again with a smile on your face, because this is such a subject that I think most people get scared to talk about or saddened by, but we can still make a difference, and the hope is still there. And that's what I think is the most important thing to keep talking about. And it's obviously, it's it's clear from the documentary that the plastic crisis is not as much about littering as much as it's about social justice and the climate and environmental breakdown, right? Can you explain the relationship between plastic and the climate and social justice versus plastic and littering?
Absolutely. So the plastic and littering, I mean, the end of life disposal of the plastic, like if you dump it on the curb or the bin, that's like 5 seconds in its whole long life. And that's what industry has been so good at making us think that's the issue. So really with plastic, it's made out of fossil fuels. So it starts when oil and gas is pulled out of the earth. Usually that's in areas where it leaves enormous environmental devastation. It's often on indigenous lands. It's often in, this is where the social justice comes in. It's often in low-income communities, communities of color. It's communities that society has decided don't deserve the absolute best environmental health and protection. So there's an environmental justice violation at the very beginning of plastic's life cycle when you pull out the oil and gas. Then it is trucked or trained. You know, there's these oil trains that are like traveling bombs that explode that are so horrific. We transport this stuff to facilities where we then mix in hazardous chemicals, stabilizers, dyes, all plasticizers. We have this already toxic petroleum, oil and gas. We mix in these hazardous chemicals, and those facilities, the workers are exposed, so that you've got your worker health and justice issue. Again, they are predominantly located in low-income communities of color. So again, you've got an environmental and social justice issue where whole communities are treated as disposable that have to breathe the impacts of these horrific petrochemical facilities. There's some places in the Gulf in the U.S., the Gulf of Mexico, that are so cram-packed of these things that they're called national sacrifice zones, or they call them Cancer Alley. The health impacts are so violent. It's like a systemic violence associated with this. That's then you produce the stuff, and also all these chemicals are mixed in there. They're not just the workers are exposed, but then you bring it to the consumer who's going to use the stuff. Then we get exposed by using these plastic products that leak endocrine disrupting chemicals, neurotoxins, all of these things, and then it's disposed. And so it either goes to a landfill or an incinerator, which is again located in low-income communities of color, or exported overseas or dumped somewhere. So from production to extraction to production to use to disposal, the whole thing is a huge mess. And the alternative is carry a cloth bag. Wash your dish. Like, the alternatives are so much simpler. You know, you asked why I stay so positive and hopeful. It's because there's alternatives. This is not an intractable problem. There are some problems that are really, really hard and I don't know how to solve. This is not one of them. Like, we absolutely could do something different if everybody bands together and demands that change. This is totally solvable.
I mean, that's the problem as well, that you see about the people who've lived and were born and raised in those areas who've just seen it change within 10 years. Like, I thought, especially about the documentary, that timeline, what you saw, and when people started to fight against it. And now what the companies do and say, like, we're going to be better, we're going to try, we're going to say all these things. You just look at them and you're like, you're just lying though. And you're just hiding stuff. And all those adverts they make, and the advertising companies who do them, it's just, they're made with that light music and those like all American voices, and it makes me sick, really, and angry and sad, most of all. Those are kind of all those feelings that come up. Where do you think plastic fits into the wider context of waste and consumerism in general, though?
Well, I think it fits in enormous ways. One way that plastic fits into waste is that plastic is the fastest growing and most hazardous part of our waste stream right now. I have a funny hobby, which may sound weird, but I really encourage it. It's fascinating, is I love going to visit landfills. And I've been doing it since my first landfill in 1986. If you go to visit landfills often and you just stand there and you look out at the waste, first of all, it's fascinating to actually see what's coming out of our society. But I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. I do it in every city I go to. I go visit the dump, because you get to learn so much about that society. And you can just do we call it visual audit. Just look and see what's changing. It's almost all plastic now. And the problem with that is there's nothing to do with plastic garbage. There's other stuff in the waste stream that's not really waste, that it's resources in the wrong place. Paper you can recycle, organic stuff, food waste you can compost, metal you can recycle, a lot of things you can reuse. Most of the things in the waste stream, there are rational solutions for it. but there is nothing you can do with plastic. And so a lot of environmentalists that mean really well look at a pile of plastic and say, what should we do with it? There's no answer. It's too late. You can dump it, you can burn it, or you can export it on dump in somebody else's yard. Very, very tiny bit you can recycle, but very little. So we have to not just look at plastic as a waste problem, but as a materials problem. And the waste stream has just changed so much over the last 30 years with so much plastic. Let me tell you, we're going to see a lot more of it now, because the fossil fuel industries are banking on massive expansion of plastic. This is a really important point for folks to realize. The fossil fuel companies, they exist to pull oil and gas out of the ground. That's what they do. That's what they have always done. That's why they have promulgated fake science, denied climate activism, blocked climate solutions. They want to keep pulling that stuff out of the ground. And they know that the demand for fossil fuels for energy is going down. We're seeing buildings become more energy efficient. Cars the whole transportation is becoming electrified. All around the world, renewable energy is exploding. So the demand for fossil fuels for power is shrinking. So what those fossil fuel companies should do is say, we've had a good run, we're going to shrink too, but they're not. They're absolutely committed to keep pulling that stuff out of the ground. So they are banking on massive increased plastic, because plastic is fossil fuel. So that is sort of their Hail Mary. You know that term? It's a sports term. That's like their Hail Mary. It's a football term. Their last chance ditch effort to stay in business. The petrochemical industries are trying to triple the amount of single-use plastic that we use in this country. I mean, we're already drowning in it. We must resist this. We must stand together and say, absolutely not. You fooled us before. You told us it was recyclable. You told us you cared about the environment. You will not fool us again.
Will you take me to a landfill at some point, especially if we both live in California?
That
Please.
would be so fun. That would be
I would love to. I would really love to. Also, what is the role of the economy in all this generally?
Well, the economy is a set of rules that influence what decisions are made. And it's really important to realize that, because the current rules facilitate waste. They reward people and businesses for making waste. I mean, one example is the enormous amount of public money, our money, that goes to subsidize fossil fuels. And fossil fuels are the feedstock to plastics. I had a conversation with somebody who works at a gigantic corporation that uses tons of plastic, and I can't tell you which corporation because it was a private conversation, but I asked the person, what alternatives are you looking at for plastics, for all of the shampoos and everything that your gigantic company makes? And he had so many examples. They have plastic made out of mushrooms. They have plastic that turns into fish food when it gets wet. Like, they have
I know about that one.
many technologically possible options. It's incredible. I said, why aren't you using those? And they said, because new plastic is so cheap, because it's so cheap to get new oil and gas. They said that the rules in the economy have made it that it's much, much more expensive for them to do what is right. And that means the rules are wrong. And so I asked this person, what can a group like Greenpeace do? What can activists like our Greenpeace supporters around the world, what can we do to change the situation, to encourage the use of these alternatives? And he said, go fight oil and gas. He said, keep it in the ground. He said, fight fossil fuels. He said, the less fossil fuels, the more the situation changes, the context changes, and then the alternatives are available. But don't let any company, any government person tell you there is no alternative, because that is a huge fat lie.
Well said. I think, Christabel, should we just go on to people's questions? Because thank you guys so much, because you guys have been sending some wonderful questions. Should we?
Gosh, there's so many questions from all over the world.
I mean, it's wonderful. Shall I just go for the first one? Okay, so sorry if I say anyone's names wrong, because we have such an amazing group of people from around the world. Reem El Sheikh just said, did say a while ago, do you think the damage that has been done now can be undone or just reduced? If so, what are the important ways for young teenagers like me to help or contribute in helping? Great question.
So there is some environmental damage that is so bad that we can't undo it. But the more important thing is to stop more. I mean, that the analogy of the bathtub that you mentioned earlier is a perfect analogy about plastics. Or I often say, if you came home from holiday and you had left your kitchen tap on, and your sink was overflowing with water, and the kitchen was overflowing with water, and your living room was overflowing with water, and your beautiful carpets were getting all wet, what is the first thing do? Do you start mopping those carpets, or do you go turn off the tap? And that's what
Can you explain a little bit about the turning off the bath analogy? Because in case anyone hasn't watched it, it would be helpful to explain it, because I don't mean actually turning off the tap in the bath, everyone who hasn't seen it, but if you want to explain that a little bit as well.
Yeah, what that refers to is that there's so much new plastic waste entering the environment every second. There's so much new plastic that if we worry about cleaning it up, and it's still coming, we're never going to catch up. So if your bathtub was overflowing, do you work on capturing the water that's pouring out of it, or do you go turn off the tap? So in terms of the oceans, we see a lot of interest in cleaning up the oceans. And I'm so sorry. I wish it was possible. You know, it would be so beautiful if it was possible. It's simply not possible because the ocean is so vast. The pieces of plastic many of them are so small, not all, there's some big ones too, but many of them have been beaten down by the waves and the sun, that they're so tiny that any kind of vacuum or something that would try to clean up all that plastic out of the ocean, it would also suck up life that we don't want. And the ocean is too huge. You just simply can never clean up at that scale. So instead of trying to clean it up, stop the new plastic from coming in. That means banning single-use plastic as much as possible. It means stopping these companies from building out new factories to make more single-use plastic. It means going to the bank where you bank and finding out if that bank funds fossil fuel projects and say, you stop funding those fossil fuel projects or we're going to cut up our card. It means going to your government and saying, I don't want any public subsidies to fossil fuel corporations. Do you know, right now in the US, because of COVID, all these companies are going to the government to ask for a bailout. The plastics industry that has caused billions and billions and billions of dollars of damage around the world to people's health, to community health, to the oceans, they're going to the US government and asking for $1 billion in bailout to help the plastic